Hello. Hi. I don't know. That's lower in the Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Camden Furnace. We're here this evening to give Paul Walmsley's book, Just an Ordinary Decent Criminal, a good send-off as it starts to make its way around the world. Working on the 6 degrees of separation theory, all of our paths have already met. One way or another, be it family, school, neighbourhood, prison, football, music, or nefarious goings-on, which we'll now classify as other. For those of you who've already read the book, I'm Becky Talentire, former croupier, football writer, TV reporter, author, and more recently, creative writing tutor at HMP Kennet, where I worked for 7 years. For those who haven't read the book, I hope I haven't spoiled the ending for you. I was a writer in another lifetime, but kind of painted myself into a corner, because more specifically, I was an Everton writer. While I found writing easy, extracting payment from the people who published your work is far more complicated. I decided that if I couldn't write for a living, I'd teach it instead. As you can imagine, there's a high turnover of students in a prison. My class consisted of around 10 lads from all walks of life. Bent accountants, drink drivers, fighters, corrupt politicians, even a corrupt dentist, I kid you not. Murderers, thieves, arsonists, but most frequently drug-related crimes. In fact, I'd go so far as to say, if there were no drug or alcohol-related criminals, there'd only be about 24 people in prison. It's a big business. Lots of fellas in jail are totally dyslexic, unable to even write their own names, but they're super clever in other ways. In fact, some of the kindest, smartest, funniest, and most generous and most sensitive people I ever met were in prison, wearing grey trackies. I used to tell them that if they channeled their wisdom into something legal, they'd be running the country, and I meant it. Amongst my lads, my nickname was Olive Oil, Popeye's girlfriend for you youngsters, and apparently I had a reputation for being a bit of a harridan, which is hard to believe, I know. I only accepted lads in my class who actually requested to be there and wanted to learn. That way I had the cream of the crop, the brightest, smartest and most dedicated. If they didn't want to participate, that was fine. They could get a wing job or go on a different course. Because our classroom was an oasis of calm, sanity and creativity. It was also the place where men could bare their souls and express their deepest emotions via a biro and a piece of paper. Nothing personal that was spoken about in that room ever went out of the door, which was our promise to each other. It was a bit like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. The hangover without the booze, food, or the tiger. My mission was to teach the lads that the pen is mightier than the sword. Creative writing in HMP Kennet wasn't for the faint-hearted. It was 6 hours a day of hard work. Every morning we would have a writing burst which had to include the word or phrase on the board and then read it out loud to the rest of the class. On their first day I had newbies saying that they would rather have had an extra 3 years added to their sentence than read out loud. By the time they moved on or were released, they would have read out loud in front of a full house at Wembley Stadium. It built self-confidence and self-esteem and enabled the lads to unearth deeply buried memories. Reading their stories regularly reduced us to tears, and I always had a strategically placed box of man-sized tissues on my desk. I frequently saw the hardest, toughest, biggest and hairiest men sobbing. But what happened in creative writing stayed there. One morning, a small lad was standing at my classroom door. He could barely see through the glass panel when he knocked. I told him to come in and interrogated him as to whether he wanted to be there or if he'd been forced to attend. And when he met the harsh entry criteria, I invited him to sit down and make himself at home. He told me his name was Walmsley, A7829CG. It didn't take him long to tell us he had a guitar and asked whether he could bring it to class to entertain us. Entertainment was rare and we were delirious. Of course we said yes. He settled in quickly, entertained us, made us laugh with tales of his red bike and his massive and, dare I say, slightly dysfunctional family. Once he'd got his tiny feet under the table, he bided his time, then came to me with the fattest, heaviest lever arch file in the world. He told me it was a letter to his mum, a 140,000 word letter. Would I read it, please? He thought it might become a book. Can you imagine how many books I read behind the razor wire? Let me tell you, too bloody many. Some of them were better than others. I'll leave it at that. The Kessler Awards is an annual competition for people who are under lock and key, offenders, secure patients and detainees. It's a charitable event which is one of the highlights of the prison year because it awards cash prizes. When I say cash,